The Cybersecurity Agony Uncles podcast. I'm Uncle Stevie and I'm here with Uncle Rich.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So, Rich, do you want to take us through the question that's cropped up this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So today's question goes as follows. I'm a head of information security. It's a title in name only because, quite frankly, I don't have any authority. I'm just a person people point at when things go wrong or when something scary but unrelated crops up in the news. I love my job though, and I do find I have a repeat issue in that I don't seem to be able to get sign off for any budget ever. I know other non security departments have managed to, so it's not like the company doesn't have the funds or the inclination to spend money. I spoke to your CEO Eliza at a conference about this, and she gave me great advice about approaching the topic of budgets in the language of finance and business risk rather than security. I tried this, and I still can't get sign off. I'm one of 3 people in the security team, and the burden of responsibility is on my shoulders, but I can't get any tooling. Can't get more people, and it feels kind of pointless. It's almost like I've been hired in this role to impress our investors because nothing I do seems to work. I'm not asking for the earth, I'm literally asking for vulnerability management of key assets and login and monitoring of key assets first. How can I relay the need for these basic measures in a way that gets me somewhere? Help! P.S. I love the premise of this podcast, fellas.
Well done. Which is that's what got you chosen this time round, eh? Yeah. Well, I would say probably the best thing to do is polish up the CV and go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that really might well be the long and short of it because you can't be head of something and have no authority.
No, I
Um,
completely agree with that.
because obviously, by the time you are head of something, you should have some serious miles under your belt.
Mm.
You know, you should have skills and experience and knowledge, and all of that should add value to the company.
Yeah, exactly. It's there is a common it's like a senior management failing around giving people the responsibility for things without giving them the authority to fix the things or do the job that they've been given the responsibility for. And it looks like a very typical instance of that particular dysfunction within this organization. It is quite common that this is the case, but quite frankly, if you haven't got even influence over the budget, that is going to make this extremely difficult. It doesn't sound like the people who are budget holders actually understand what the point of security is, which is then a very difficult sell if you're looking to do stuff. I mean, you can do a modicum of stuff without any budget at all. There are 3 people, so presumably there's a whole load of manual things that can be done. But yeah, I mean, but trying and failing to get budget for simple things like vulnerability management and logging and monitoring, that doesn't bode well in this organisation.
No, it really doesn't, and it must make the person who's asking this question wonder exactly what they are the head of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a problem in cyber that people get impressive job titles in order to keep them in the organization, but don't necessarily work at the level that's requisite with the title. We see this a lot, don't we, with CISO as a title, which might mean anything from security manager all the way through to board member, but somewhere in there is where most people are. But it's rare that CISOs, especially in smaller organisations, really actually have much in the way of influence. Although they are generally the people that carry the can when it all goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a couple of things that they can do that don't cost anything,
Mm.
of course. So you know, as with any sort of role, you're dealing with people, process, and technology. people, they've got a couple. It doesn't say how big their business is, but I'm going to assume that somebody further up the food chain decided that having a team of three would be roughly enough, more or less.
Mm.
Um, so they've got people and they can use them. Presumably, they could also have influence over the processes around security because
Yeah.
99% of the time that costs nothing and involves a bit of paperwork and sign off, maybe at a board level potentially, but they can take positive steps to influence in that way, which you can make a dent with, which might inspire um, their managers
Mm.
or board level execs, whatever, to actually open up the purse strings. But of course, the other thing is there's a whole world of open source software out there, um, which sits in the security realm, which is just awesome stuff.
Actually, yeah, that is a very good point. There are vulnerability management tools, vulnerability scanning tools, and there are various SIEM platforms in the open source space, and some of which one that we use and know very well. Actually, I would rate above a lot of the commercial tooling that's out there. So there are things that can be done on a shoestring budget. That is a very good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I I think one of the issues with the industry as a whole is that there's so much snake oil being sold,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
at huge cost, because everyone goes, "Oh, it's enterprise software." Of course, it's going to cost you £500,000.
Yeah, it
But
doesn't need to though, does
it,
it? I mean, the
no, it
reality
doesn't
is,
need to.
yeah, the reality is, yes, you can, and yeah, of course, you get the strength of a large organisation behind that stuff, whatever that really means in practice. But if you are if you really want to make a difference and you can't get that sort of budget for the tooling, have a look at what's available. And as it says in this particular, as a particular person says, this isn't that this person's not trying to boil the ocean in one go here. They're just looking at some key assets. Well, putting together a small log aggregator or a small seam to collect information from certain key assets, and putting in some vulnerability management or some, maybe even just vulnerability scanning if they can't get the management piece of that because they can't get the interactions with the system, these key system owners in place quickly. They can at least scan them to see are there any obvious exploitable vulnerabilities. And that sort of stuff can be done with, as you say, with a small team and with very, very small budgets. And that would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And it strikes me that baby steps are what's needed here, because
Yeah.
if the company themselves had any confidence or any respect for cybersecurity as a whole, they would already have budgets available.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's obviously a lot of other factors involved when it comes to budgets, but I would say if you can demonstrate some value with something like some open source tooling or even the tools you've got. I mean, there are a couple of people on my LinkedIn feed, for instance, who talk about the virtues of the seamless SOC,
Mm.
which to me, admittedly, sounds like a whole bunch of running around between systems to read your logs. But
Yeah.
it can be done.
Yeah, it can be,
With
and I
enough.
think, yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of small organisations start in that space. I mean, you can look at some of the things the other way around as well. So vulnerability management, um, yeah, that's basic cyber hygiene. But if you can't get to the point where you've got a good working vulnerability management process, you can at least extol the virtues of having patching process. So even if you can't get people to get their heads around where the vulnerabilities lie, you can at least remove a swathe of vulnerabilities if you've got a good patching process, and and the infrastructure team has almost definitely got the ability to patch these key assets or to understand what the patch levels are in those key assets. And there's a lot of information out there around known vulnerabilities for known versions of things as well. So
Yeah,
you
exactly.
could almost start this whole process just by getting some basic asset information, and then manually checking against some known vulnerabilities. Once you can begin to highlight that there is an actual risk, that may possibly change the narrative a little bit. Oh dear, that's a terrible phrase, but you know what I mean. It may it may improve your standing within the non-technical, non-cyber, but budget-holding parts of the organisation. Got to begin somewhere if you're going to do this sort of stuff. There's something else that came to mind actually with this as well. That if you did get to the point where you could demonstrate that there are problems, and it's fairly clear how those problems would impact the business if those risks became issues, what the impact of the business would be. There are things you can do. So if you're talking about key assets, we've got to make an assumption then that the business relies on these key assets. We don't know much about what this business does. We don't know very much about what these assets are, but most organizations somewhere have got things that are vital to their day-to-day profitability, and they may not always be the things that technical people worry about. It may be things like actually their billing system is the most important thing, or it may be that they're, if it's a manufacturing organization, it may be, the devices which control the factories, the factory production lines, those sorts of things. If you can show that there are issues, and you can ask questions like, okay, if this particular machine that makes widgets were to fail, at what point do you start losing money, and how much money do you lose? How quickly do you lose this money? Now, they've probably got that information floating around in other parts of the organization based around their business continuity planning. So the technical teams will have disaster recovery, but the business side of the organization should have an understanding of if this thing fails, how painful is that going to be for the business? So armed with that sort of stuff, you can say, well, all right, you don't want to invest in cybersecurity, you don't want to invest in vulnerability management or even collecting the logs from these things, but you already know that you're going to lose, if this thing is down for an hour, you're beginning to lose X, Y, and Z. If this thing is down for a day, you're going to lose X, Y, and Z. If you can then tie that in with, and by the way, you're running it on an out of date, unpatched operating system, therefore the risk of it going down is much higher than the risk of it being brought down by a cyber incident. If it had been patched and had fewer vulnerabilities, you can begin to get that that narrative to the point where maybe the organization will take some of this stuff seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I completely forgot about was use the inbuilt tools at your disposal. So, um, so for patching, if you've got a Windows server in your network, for instance, you can
Yep.
install the WSUS, Windows Software or Server Update Services, whatever the acronym is,
Yep.
and you can push that out across your entire estate. And it doesn't have to be just Windows; it can patch just about anything. And if you can slipstream the updates into it, and then you'll get a view of all the assets under control, what their patch levels are like. You can pull reporting out of that, and that comes for free if you've got a
Yeah.
Windows network. But there will be equivalents for other OSs as well.
Yeah, there are definitely. So Linux is quite easy to manage en masse. So yeah, the common operating systems either come with free tools, or there are, as you say, open source tools that will fill those sorts of gaps.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of scripting in this person's future as well. Because if you don't have tools that gather the information for you, run scripts that do it. There's nothing wrong with dumping data into a spreadsheet and analyzing it that way.
No, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in rather long-winded and old-fashioned and sort of labor-intensive ways, but it can get the ball rolling.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's the main thing. You want to snowball your progress.
yeah,
You, if you can demonstrate to the higher ups in the organisation that you've managed to do this without budget, but budget will allow you to go further and do this, then you're starting to create a business case.
Yeah, I agree. There is something else that this person could do, and I think if I was in this position, I'd probably take this approach. I would look to put together a risk report
Yeah.
based, as, and I know what Eliza will have been talking about at the conference, about how to don't approach non-technical, non-cyber senior leaders with a cyber risk, present them with a business risk. If you're still struggling to get budget, but you can articulate the fact that there is a genuine risk there, and the risk is in terms of finance to the business or reputation to the business, it may be possible for you to say, well, instead of actually, in order to address the risks that I've just told you about, I want this money to do these sorts of things, because they have no method of assessing whether what you're saying and what you're proposing will actually address the things that you've raised. You see what I mean? You've raised the risk and you've raised the solution.
Yeah,
Which is,
exactly.
but there is always the old adage of if you can persuade the the board or whoever signs off on the budget that there is potentially an issue here, it might be worth getting an external, instead of asking for money to fix it, ask for money to get an external organization of repute to come in and to quantify that risk for the board. So you're not saying, I know all this stuff, look, I'm really clever. What you're saying is that I believe that this is a problem. I think that the right thing to do is to get external experts to come in and look to see, if they'll either back up what I'm saying, or they'll say, no, actually, we're perfectly okay, you don't need to spend that money. Now, bizarrely, spending a lot of money getting somebody to tell you something that you already know can often be very successful. And I've both used that as a process, and I have been kind of on the other end of that and been the person that's been sitting there going, well, actually, I know what the answer is and I know what we need to do. And then to be, if you get a good consultant to come in, they'll actually ask you questions like, well, okay, where are the areas? Let's shortcut this process. What do you know about that's an issue? And they'll take that as a starting point. And they can either say, yeah, all right, this is actually a problem. I'll write you a report that the board will understand, that basically says the board is now carrying this risk. This is not a risk that you can offload onto the head of information security, because they're not kind of legally responsible for the issues that would be coming out of that. It's actually the board members that would be legally responsible if there was, if they were negligent in the way that they treated their, securing their data or securing their environments. So it could be possible that you can engage with people that can help. And in that space, there are things that can be done along the lines of cyber maturity assessments. So based on, the CIS do some really good stuff in this space, cyber maturity space. So you can look across various aspects of the business as a whole. So it's not really sort of focused on the techie cybery side of things. It's focused on, as a whole, is your business secure to the level which is appropriate for the sort of business you are, the sort of industry you are, the overall maturity of your business? Because there's no point in having, aiming for CMMI level 5 cyber security maturity if it's a CMMI level 1 business maturity organization. There would just be a huge disjoint, and it won't work. So you can get you can do this stuff yourself. You can create an account and log on and do it. But as I say, sometimes board members need an external organization to write you the report. So that's a space. So maybe that's a way forward. And something else that's might be possible to do would be to look at whether this person could get budget for something more like red teaming or purple teaming, or even just penetration testing of particular key assets, to try and quantify the risk better, and present the risk to the budget holders in a way that helps them to understand that fixing this stuff is actually quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing you can do is you can get a bit creative. So a tabletop exercise. if it's run in house, doesn't have to cost anything, bar a
No,
couple of hours of people's time.
that's true.
And that can often focus the mind as well, because it really puts key players in the business on the spot around how they would react if there was any kind of incident. And it doesn't have to necessarily be hackers breaking in to your platform or whatever. It could be a mechanical failure in a manufacturing plant. It doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily have to be tied directly. It doesn't have to be quite so on the nose to be a cyber threat, um,
agree with
because
that.
anything that affects that CIA triad counts, frankly.
Yeah, I would
But
agree with that. And again, if you wanted to get kind of independent validation of those things, there are various organizations that will run those as an event. Take a day or an afternoon or whatever it is, agree on a scenario, and then run through the scenario, including, chucking in, the odd stuff that crops up, things they wouldn't necessarily think about. To focus the minds of senior leaders on whether they do they understand properly what these risks actually are to the business. I suspect they don't at the moment.
yeah, it sounds to me like the person that asked this question has a little bit more evangelizing to do within their business.
Yeah,
They need to raise their profile, raise the profile of security, and go from there. Because the only other alternative is to literally stop flogging a dead horse and find work elsewhere.
yeah. I mean, there is a point at which you've just got to draw a line under things. I've worked in organisations where it became apparent that we were never going to be able to do the things that needed to be done in order to address the real business risks, because the there was no risk culture within the organization. It was all focused on um, the sort of commercial aspects of the business, getting the job done.
Yeah,
And there is a point at which you've got to say, well, uh, actually, I'm not going to be able to get I'm not going to be able to get this organization to a place where they are secure in what they're doing properly. Um, do I want to be the person associated with this if it all goes wrong, or are there half a dozen smaller things that I can do which will leave them in a good position, and then build on that to look elsewhere for where the next step would be? Which I'm afraid, that's not a great thing to be recommending to somebody, but it's got to be in the back of your mind. Don't, yeah, as you say, don't flog a dead horse.
yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that's cropped up lately, primarily in my LinkedIn and Twitter, is around the behaviour of senior security professionals.
Mm,
Obviously, with what's going on in the States recently with Uber, and more recently with the SEC filing against the CISO at SolarWinds. And
mm,
I think you have to work with integrity. And one of the things about working with integrity is knowing when you can't help.
yeah.
And if you get to that point, then it is time to move on and help someone that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be honest, in our industry, there are not a lot of people compared to the amount of need. So moving to somewhere else is not. I'm never going to say it's easy changing jobs, but um, it's not like there's a surplus of people that understand cybersecurity looking for a small number of jobs. It's kind of the other way around. I mean, you see all the time these stats about, we're in the UK, we are lacking X thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever it may be this month of, cyber people or infosec people or whatever it would be. So, there are organisations that have got a need and that do understand it. So, that's a possibility. I feel sorry though for the business that they'll be leaving, because it sounds like they've got somebody that really wants to do a good job and wants to make things better, and is just struggling with internal politics and budgeting.
Yeah, it's never fun, but at least we've managed to throw out there several really good solid options on what they can do to get things moving in their business, whether that's sort of ranging from open source tooling to activities they can do to engage the board and things like that. So I think there must be something good in there that they can implement.
Yeah, I think there's certainly stuff that could be tried, and yeah, exactly. You can try combinations of these things, but starting out with getting enough of an interest to see whether um, bringing in an external organization to do a more in-depth review would be a good thing. If using open source tooling or using the tooling that's available and writing risk-based reports around those things and presenting them back up the chain again doesn't get you anywhere, then you're kind of stuck at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I th- I think that wraps it up with everything I can say on the matter. Stephen, any closing thoughts?
No, I think we've covered, well, certainly all the obvious stuff. And that, I do wish this person good luck with getting some traction in this organization. It is a common problem. When you're stuck in that position, you can feel like you're the only person that's not able to get their agenda looked at properly. But actually, one way or another, that's a fairly typical position to be in at some point in an organization, and it can be overcome. So keep plugging away at it is what I'd say. Take some of these ideas, see if you can implement them, and if that gets some traction, that's great. If it doesn't, don't worry too much about it. There are plenty of people that need your skills.
Perfect. In which case, thank you to the listeners who are online at the moment and anyone that listens on in the future. As those trendy YouTuber types like to say, please like, share, and subscribe.
Oh dear, that's awful. But I
I
would say
know.
if anybody listening or anybody listening to this later has any good ideas, chuck them in the comments, because you never know. You may have come across, you may have ideas that Uncle Rich and I have not actually thought of, and we'd always be very pleased to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Catch you at the next one. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.